which is an introduction. And in this section, you'll learn a little bit about who I am and what gives me the right to even talk about self-awareness. We'll also talk about what my objectives are for this course. So in other words, what I want you to get out of this course. We'll discuss what happiness even is. So I'll be defining exactly what I mean by the terms happiness and happy. We'll look at exactly what I mean by knowing yourself. And I'll also give you an overview of why knowing yourself is so fundamentally important to happiness, because it really is. Lecture 1. Introduction, my story and objectives. So hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me. Grab yourself a cup of coffee, cup of tea, glass of water, maybe even a gin and tonic, and let's get cracking. And I'd like to start by just talking a little bit about me, not because I'm narcissistic and because I love talking about myself, but simply because I think it's important for you all to know who I am, where I've come from, and more importantly, how and why I know the things that I do. So starting with the basics, I'm currently an area manager working for a travel money company. I'm also very entrepreneurial. I wouldn't say I'm a natural born entrepreneur, but I definitely have entrepreneurial traits and entrepreneurial tendencies. And that's one of the reasons that I enjoy my current job as area manager so much, because I really do enjoy it. It's one of the best jobs I've ever had in terms of how happy it makes me. And that's because it allows me to be entrepreneurial. It's very independent. I have a lot of control over how I achieve my objectives. I have a lot of control over my own schedule from day to day. And I don't have a boss breathing down my neck. And that's a good example of me applying my own self-awareness and my own knowledge about myself to actually enable me to get a good job. Because I knew I would enjoy this job, because I knew it would suit the kind of person that I am. I've done enough right in my life to make me very happy, and I've done enough wrong to make me a great teacher. I've had lots of incredible experiences, and I also have lots of hobbies and interests that make me very happy, and I've also achieved many things that have also made me very happy. But I've also done enough wrong to make me a great teacher. I've had my fair share of failures, and I've had quite a bit of challenge and adversity, especially in more recent years. And that's allowed me to learn so much about myself, but also so much about life and about happiness in general. And of course, I want to teach you a lot of the stuff I've learned specifically here about knowing yourself and self-awareness as a gateway to happiness. I'd like to now just move on and tell you a little bit about a story that began in 2007. In 2007, I started investing and trading in financial markets. I just did this on the side away from my normal job, which at the time was working for a wine company. And I was good at it. I was good at investing and trading. I learned how to do it properly. And for the next few years, I made good money, slowly and steadily, from what you might call the proper professional practice of disciplined investing and trading. But about 5 years later, I started to take on more and more risk in the financial markets. In hindsight, that was an escape from my marriage and my life, because I was about to go through a divorce. But whatever the reason, the fact is, I went from investing and trading properly until eventually I was just completely gambling on the markets. I still thought I was just trading, but I was completely gambling. And to cut a much longer story short, this completely destroyed my life. I eventually lost everything, and more, if that's even possible. I lost, for example, all my money, which at the time was a lot. I lost both my houses. I lost some of my friends' money, some of my family's money. I even got £70,000 into debt, and I was sleeping in my car because I couldn't afford rent and I didn't want anyone to find out what had happened to me. As you can imagine, I was a mess. So to summarise, in 2015, I was sleeping in my car, £70,000 in debt, and as you can imagine, a mental, emotional and financial mess. The next few years, right up to the present day, were all about recovering and rebuilding. Obviously, my first focus was to recover my life, especially mentally, emotionally and financially. And then, of course, it was about rebuilding my life in every area. Again, mentally, emotionally, financially, but also in my career, relationships, lifestyle, everything. And because of that experience, but also because of other things I've been through in my life and experienced, good and bad, I now know myself on a level like never before. I've invested a lot of time, not to mention trial and error, into fully knowing myself and understanding how I've achieved this level of self-awareness. because not only do I have a high knowledge of self-awareness now, and not only do I know myself very well, I'm also the happiest I've ever been. And I want to share some of the principles and lessons that I've learned about self-awareness and knowing yourself, and of course how you can apply that to yourselves to make yourself happier. This is a picture of and a quote from a guy called Tony Nadal, who is actually the uncle and former coach to the legendary tennis player Rafael Nadal. And the quote goes, "Al final, el éxito en la vida es ser feliz." Now please excuse my Spanish, but roughly translated, what that means is, in the end, true success in life is to be happy. And I've included that quote because it's just one of my favourite quotes about happiness, and I passionately believe it to be true. And the theme of that quote, about true success being about happiness, is something that crops up in a lot of the work that I do. As for the goal of this course and what I want you to get out of it, at the end of this course you will understand why knowing yourself is so important. You'll know yourself better than you did before. You'll understand the kind of exercises to do in order to continue and accelerate your journey of self-awareness. And you'll also be ready to actually apply self-awareness to your life, specifically in a way that's designed to make you more intentional, more productive, and most importantly, more happy. And when I say more intentional, I mean living your life in a way in which you do things with the specific intent of getting what you want in life, getting you to where you want to be in life, and creating the joy, fulfillment, and happiness that you deserve, as opposed to just drifting through life aimlessly or living a life that isn't really the one you wanted. And this course packs everything that I've learned about self-awareness into a course that's designed to help give you the foundations to build a life that you can be proud of, with happiness as the barometer of success. Now, most of the time I'll be using straightforward slides and voiceover to make my points and to help you with your learnings, but there will also be some direct-to-camera videos explaining certain things, so you'll get to see my lovely face. There'll also be some exercises to do, like quizzes and questions to answer. Please do make sure that you do those, because that will ensure that you get the most out of this course, and ideally do them during the course. And I'll also give you a couple of recommended readings in terms of books that I recommend. Now, you don't have to read those during the course. I'm just recommending those if you want to learn a bit more about the subject that I'm talking about. But I'll recommend them with the intention that you read them at some point in the following weeks and months in order to continue your progress and development. Lecture 2. What is happiness? We're going to move on now and define happiness. And for me, there are two types of happiness. First of all, there's what I've called micro-happiness. And this is basically any positive feeling experienced in the moment. And that moment might range from a few seconds right through to a few hours. So here we're talking about things like the happiness you feel on the birth of your child or on your wedding day. It can also be the happiness you experience when you go for a coffee with a friend or when you give your friend a ring. It can be the happiness you experience when your favourite football team scores a goal. It can be the happiness you experience when you win a tennis match. It's those micro moments. Those moments we all experience when we feel happy in the moment. Then we've got something called macro happiness. And I've defined macro happiness as loving yourself and loving your life. And when I talk about gaining self-awareness as a gateway to happiness, I'm specifically talking about macro happiness. And that applies in general, by the way. Whenever I talk about happiness or being happy in any of my courses or any of my videos or books, unless otherwise stated, I do generally mean macro happiness. The happiness on the macro scale. Loving yourself and loving your life. So we're talking about gaining self-awareness as a gateway to loving yourself and loving your life. And when I say to love yourself, I don't of course mean in that arrogant, self-obsessed way. I'm simply talking about self-esteem. And knowing yourself deeply will definitely help fuel your self-esteem. Someone who loves themselves and is loving their life, in other words, somebody who has that macro level happiness, will also naturally experience lots of micro happiness moments. In other words, somebody who loves their life and is really happy in their life in general will of course also experience many happy moments. But it's also important to remember that it's possible to experience happiness in the micro while being unhappy in the macro. Now, to translate that into English for you, what I basically mean by that is that it's possible to experience happy moments even when you're not happy in your life as a whole. And the most classic example of that would be the fact that even people who suffer from depression still experience happiness on the micro level. That could be laughing at a joke or enjoying a special meal that they're having. But the point is, even people who are not enjoying their lives, they're not happy in their lives as a whole, still have happy moments. On the flip side, every person that I know who experiences happiness on the macro level also experiences unhappiness on the micro level, such as fleeting feelings of frustration, sadness, anger, and so on. And this is perfectly normal. What I'm basically saying there is that people who are very happy in their life, such as myself even, right now I'm very, very happy in my life, they still experience negative emotions. There is no such thing as feeling amazing all the time. Even the most happy people in the world still have moments, whether it be minutes or hours or even the odd day or two, when they feel down or depressed or sad or angry or frustrated or any other negative emotion. And that's perfectly normal. Knowing yourself will help achieve an incredible and abundant level of happiness, but don't ever think that will mean some kind of mythical continuous state of delirium, because that just doesn't exist. We're not talking about some magical world of rainbows and unicorns, and neither are we talking about some magical world where everything is perfect all the time. Being incredibly happy in your life still means that you will occasionally experience negative emotions. You will still occasionally feel sad, frustrated, angry, and so on, and that's perfectly normal. Multiple studies have shown just how important happiness is, but it's important to understand that studies into happiness have to be very careful to make sure that happiness really is the only variable being measured. For example, you might see a study that says happy people live longer than unhappy people. But it could be, when you look at the detail of the study, that all the happy people studied might earn over £30,000 a year, live in the countryside and exercise daily, and it could be that all the unhappy people studied earned less than £20,000 a year, didn't live in the countryside, and never exercised. In other words, in that particular example, it might not be the happiness itself that is driving the longer life. It might be the fact that the happy people studied, lived in the countryside, exercised daily, and earned over £30,000 a year. So you do have to be very careful when you're looking at studies into happiness and the impact that happiness has. Good studies into happiness will, however, take account for all these other variables like income and lifestyle and healthcare and so on, and they will be able to narrow down the study so that happiness really is the only variable being measured. And to get back to my original point here, studies that have managed to control for everything else and have happiness as the only variable have still shown, beyond doubt, that happy people really do live longer than unhappy people. And that happy people have more physical and mental energy and are generally more productive in their lives. Studies have also shown that happy people are more confident and engaged in all aspects of their lives, including work, where they tend to get promoted faster. And that happy people have more friends and better networks. And if all that wasn't enough, a review of 225 studies in the Psychological Bulletin found that success is not the key to happiness, as has often been thought, but that if anything, happiness is the key to success. Happiness really is the key performance indicator of life. It's the only metric that matters. And I feel the need to say that because in society we still judge success based on things like how much money you have, how much money you make, how big your house is, and so on. But be under no illusion, true success is to be happy. As a society, we really do need to redefine what we mean by success. And happiness begins with knowing yourself. In other words, happiness begins with self-awareness. Lecture 3, the foundation of happiness, self-awareness. So we've already defined happiness in general terms and why it's important. What we're going to do now is do the same for self-awareness. In other words, we're going to define self-awareness and discuss why it's important. So first of all, Wikipedia defines self-awareness as the capacity for introspection and the ability to recognize oneself as an individual, and is how an individual consciously knows and understands their own character, feelings, motives, and desires. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is knowing yourself, knowing who you are as a person, what drives you, what motivates you, what your values are, everything about you. And just to be clear, when I talk about knowing yourself, I simply mean self-awareness. In other words, they are interchangeable terms. Self-awareness means knowing yourself. Knowing yourself means self-awareness. And I passionately believe that knowing yourself is vital to happiness, and it's the foundation upon which happiness is built. In other words, without knowing yourself, it's pretty much impossible to be happy. Every happy person in the world knows themselves. It's that simple. Now, don't get me wrong, there might be people who are very happy in the world, and if you walk up to them and ask, do you know yourself? They might go, what are you on about? Not really. But I can guarantee you that they do know themselves. It's just that it might be subconscious for some people. This is a quote from John C. Maxwell. I don't know much about him other than the fact that he's an American author and speaker, but this is a lovely little quote from him, which is, to grow yourself, you must first know yourself. And it's so true. It's another reason as to why knowing yourself is so important. In order to grow as a person, learn, develop, and ultimately become very happy, you have to first know yourself. So the question now is, do you know yourself? Do you know who you really are? You see, when people talk about their soul, whether you believe in that concept or not, what they really mean is their true selves. In other words, who you really are. When people talk about their soulmate, what they basically mean is a mate, someone who loves them for who they really are. So when we talk about your true self, we're not talking necessarily about the person you like to think you are. Because sometimes there is a difference between the person you think you are and the person you actually are. There might not be a difference, don't get me wrong, but quite often in people there is a difference between who they think they are and who they actually are. Similarly, when we talk about your true self, we're not talking about the person that you wish you were. Because again, there can often be a difference between the person you wish you were and the person you actually are. We're also not talking about the person that you might portray on social media. And again, I'm not saying that you don't portray your real self on social media, but the fact is, many people don't necessarily portray their true selves on social media. We're also not talking about the person that you might pretend to be in front of your friends or work colleagues. And again, maybe you are your complete self in front of your friends or work colleagues, but in many cases, people do present a bit of an image or a bit of a facade. So we're not necessarily talking about the person that you pretend to be in front of your friends or work colleagues, and we're also not talking about the person that you present to your family, because that can also sometimes be a little bit different to who you really are. Because when we talk about who you are, when we talk about your true self, we're talking about who you really are. At your core, what are your values? What does really motivate you? What does really drive you? What do you enjoy? When you strip away the influence of society and friends and parents, what do you want to do with your life? We're going to finish off Lecture 3 and indeed Section 1 now with a video of myself explaining why knowing yourself is so important. So I'll see you after the video. Welcome to Section 2, How to Truly Know Yourself. So this is where we get down to business and where you start to gain a higher level of self-awareness. And in this section, you'll learn about what your values are, the questions to ask and answer in order to start knowing yourself on a deeper level, the big 5 personality traits and roughly where you stand against each of these, whether you are generally introverted, extroverted or an ambivert and why it matters, and in general terms you'll also learn more about who you really are. Lecture 4, what are your values? So I'd like to begin Section 2 by helping you to learn what your values are. Because in the same way that I believe knowing yourself is the foundation of happiness, I believe that knowing your values is the foundation of knowing yourself. And so that's why we're going to start with actually trying to learn what your values are. And the online Oxford Dictionary describes values as principles or standards of behaviour, one's judgment of what is important in life. And I think that's a really good definition because when you think about what your values are, I want you to think about them in terms of principles or standards of behaviour or in terms of generally what's important to you in your life. And some useful questions to ask yourself in order to help you figure out what your values are could be things like, what are the most important things in the world to you? More specifically, what are the most important things in the world to you in terms of happiness and fulfillment? You can also ask yourself, in the big picture of your life, what do you most care about? What sort of things do you put above everyone and everything else? And the kind of answers that you come up with to these questions are your values. And figuring out your values and knowing what they are really is the starting point of knowing yourself. And I want you to shortly start thinking about what your own values are, but firstly I want you to check out some examples of values below, just to get you in the right mindset and to get you into the right zone for this exercise. So here's a list of some possible values. It's very important to understand that this is just a small selection of hundreds of possibilities. So don't choose from this list. It's very important that you think about what your values are. It's got to be very specific to you. Only you really know. But some possible examples, I'm not going to go through this whole list, but I'll just pick out a few from the list. We've got things like adventure, certainty, compassion, family, freedom, friendship, health, independence, kindness, learning, optimism, productivity, security, teamwork, understanding, wealth, winning. But as I said, this is just some random examples just to give you an idea as to what I mean by values. Because remember, we're talking about principles or standards of behaviour, or indeed, just in general terms, what's really important to you in your life on that macro scale. In terms of the big picture of life, what is really important to you in order to be happy and fulfilled. To help you a bit more with this, I'll happily share with you what my values are. So my values are travel and adventure, health and well-being, family and close friends, self-improvement, freedom to live life on my own terms, and competition. And the reason they are my values is quite simply because they are the most important things in my life. When I live my life according to those values, I'm very happy and very fulfilled. I love travel and adventure. It's very important to me in my life. And that doesn't mean I need to be going on holiday all the time, but it does mean that I need some kind of adventure in my life in order to be happy. Now that adventure might be a holiday, but it could also be a hike close to home. It could be a walk in the woods just from my house. It could be climbing a tree when I'm out on a walk. But it can also even be things like having a night out somewhere different. Even that feeds the adventurous side of me. Health and well-being is also incredibly important to me. I'd probably go as far as saying that health and well-being to me is my number one value. It's my top value. It's the thing I put above everything and everyone else. Because I know that without my health, I'm nothing. I can't go on adventures if I'm not healthy. I can't be there for my family and close friends if I'm not healthy. And by the way, I mean physically and mentally healthy. Family and close friends, also very, very important to me. Self-improvement. I actually figured out through a lot of the processes that I'm going to share with you that self-improvement in itself is really important to me. In other words, if I'm not improving myself, I'm less happy. I need to be improving myself in order to maximize my happiness. I also love freedom to live life on my terms, which is why I don't like jobs where I've got a boss breathing down my neck. And I love competition, but that can come in many different forms. That's not just competing against other people, it's also competing with myself. And the fact is, when you live your life based on your values, in other words, when you live your life through your values, using your values as the basis for all your decisions and goals and everything you do in terms of hobbies and experiences, you're just going to be very happy. Happiness will pour into your life. And the great thing about your values is that they can be used to guide your behavior, almost like a personal code of conduct. Now, in terms of the number of values to have, obviously we're only thinking about your top values here, because by the way, there's loads of things in life that are very important to us. You might notice that money is not on my list, but of course money is very important to me, and I'm very conscious that I need money to some extent to be able to go on travel and adventures. So I need some money in order to be able to actually fulfill some of my values. But the fact is, money in itself is not one of my top values. It's still a value because it's important to me, but it's not one of my top values. So remember, when we do this exercise, I'm not asking you to figure out everything that's important to you. It's about figuring out what the most important things are to you. And for me, the ideal number of values to have is between 5 and 10. And I have about 6. Now, technically, you could break mine down and say I've got a few more. For example, I've grouped mine like travel and adventure. You could technically class that as 2. Health and well-being, family and close friends. But even if you were to split my values into bits, like travel, adventure, health, well-being, family, close friends, self-improvement, freedom and competition, I'd still only have 9 values. So I'd still be within the 5 to 10. But I still class this as 6 values for me because things like travel and adventure, I group as 1. Although they are slightly different, it's one of the same thing to me. Same as health and well-being, and likewise family and close friends. Family and close friends are technically slightly different, but I see my close friends as family anyway, and so to me it's one value. So the question now is, how do you establish what they are for you? We're going to do an exercise now to help you figure out what your values are. So I want you to have a 10 to 15 minute brainstorming session, writing down everything you can think of that is in any way important to you in your life. I know I've just said that the ideal number of top values is 5 to 10, but at this stage, I don't want you to think in terms of your top values. I literally want you to write down everything that you can think of that is in any way important to you in your life. I don't care if you end up with 20, 50, 100 or 500 things, just write them all down in 10 to 15 minutes, everything that is important to you in your life. And in order to do this exercise properly, it might help to ask yourself a couple of questions. So you can think about things like, when were you happiest? What were you doing and why were you happy? Other than your most basic human needs, what must you have in your life to experience fulfillment? What has given your life meaning and purpose, both in the past and present? And it might also help to think in terms of any incredible experiences that you've had that really stand out, and think about what values you were exercising during those experiences. And this actually helped me to figure out some of my values, because this might sound ridiculous, but I've been on nights out before, which I've not really enjoyed very much, and I've been on some nights out that have just been unbelievable. Every now and then I've had a night out where I've just absolutely loved it. And I don't just mean a good night out, I've had loads of good nights out. I'm talking about a handful of nights where I've honestly just thought, that's a night I am never, ever going to forget. Now, of course, some of these nights, there's always other factors involved as to why you've enjoyed it so much, but I figured out that one aspect of it, one common denominator with these few small handful of nights that I've enjoyed at an unbelievable level, the common denominator has been adventure. It's felt like an adventure, and I feel like I've been on an adventure. So it is a useful exercise to think about all the incredible experiences that you've had, and to think about what values were being exercised during those experiences. And on the contrary, you can also think about any bad times you had when you felt angry or frustrated or depressed, and think about what the reasons for that were. Why did you feel angry, frustrated and down? What values were being denied? For example, when I think of some of my bad times, I unfortunately think of some parts of my marriage. Now, some of my marriage was absolutely fantastic, but some of my marriage wasn't, which is why it ended in divorce. But when I think about the bad times in terms of my marriage, and when I felt really frustrated and down, one of the things that was being denied was family and close friends, because I was in a relationship where I wasn't able to see my family and close friends and have the relationship with my family and close friends that I wanted to. And so that was dragging my happiness down, because I wasn't able to fulfill that value, that thing that was very important to me. So in that example, my value of family and close friends was being denied. Now that you have your list of values, it might be that you have way more than 10. Well, if that's the case, what we can do now is to think about whether you can group any of your values into an overall core value. So for example, maybe you've written down values like growing, learning and developing, and if you think about it, all three of those could be grouped into one value called self-improvement. To give you another example, maybe you've got things like honesty, transparency and truthfulness written down. All three of those could be grouped into a core value called integrity. To give you a personal example, when I would do this kind of exercise myself, I might have things like holidays, beaches, coastal walks, hikes, being in the countryside and skiing written down. And of course, all of those things can be grouped into one core value, which I eventually called travel and adventure. So once you've done that and you've come up with your core values, if you still have more than 10, what I'd then do is just narrow them down so that you've got a list of your top 5 to 10 values, minimum 5, maximum 10. Because remember, the purpose of this whole exercise is to come up with your top values, not just all your values, but your top 5 to 10 core values that you can then use as a guide and compass for your life. And as a final check over your values, it's good to think to yourself, do these values make you feel good about yourself? Are you proud of your top values? Do they reflect who you really are and what is most important to you in your life? Would you stay true to these values even if it wasn't necessarily popular and put you in the minority? And the last thing I'll say on this for now is just to bear in mind that you may tweak and change your values over time, and that's okay if it feels right to you. You'll probably find that if you've done it properly, most of your values probably will stay fairly consistent over your whole life. But as I said, it's not totally out there to occasionally change and tweak them. And it's probably going to most commonly happen, not because you yourself have fundamentally changed, although that can happen, but it's more commonly going to happen because you actually realize that something you've written down maybe wasn't as important to you as you originally thought. And maybe something that you didn't think was very important to you is actually more important to you than you actually thought. So the point is, don't be afraid to tweak and change your values over time, as you may change, but in particular if you realise that actually you've made a bit of a mistake and you should have included something that you didn't, or that you've got something on there that's a value that actually it is important to you, but it's not as important as you thought it was. So as long as it feels right to you, feel free to tweak and change them over time, but hopefully once you've done this exercise properly, you'll now have your list of your top 5 to 10 values. Lecture 5, using your values. So now that you have a prioritised list of your top 5 to 10 core values, it's time to use them to your advantage to help create happiness in your life. Because remember, when you live your life in alignment with your values, you are reducing the potential for you to feel conflicted and you're increasing the potential for you to feel happy. So how do we implement our values? How do we at least ensure that our lives are being lived through our values? One way to do this is to have goals and make sure that each goal aligns with at least one of your values. You can also make sure that your complete set of yearly goals and activities and plans satisfies all your top 5 to 10 values. And this is a really good thing to do when you plan your year in terms of what you want to achieve, what experiences you want to have, what activities you want to do, what hobbies you're going to do, what plans in general you have for the year, even what you want to buy during the year. It's a good idea to think about all these things in terms of, do they satisfy all of my values? Ideally, to make sure that you do feel truly fulfilled and happy, I'd say you want to be not just doing this on a yearly basis, but even on a monthly basis. In other words, make sure that even your monthly goals and monthly activities and experiences and plans satisfy your top 5 to 10 values. And another way to implement your values is that when you think of your vision for your life, do so with your values in mind, making sure that no part of your vision will go against your values and that, if anything, your vision fully reflects your most important values. So again, to use my own example, I'm not going to go into what my vision for my life is, but I can tell you with certainty that the vision I have for my life does involve travel and adventure. It involves me being physically and mentally healthy. It involves being in close contact with family and close friends. It involves me continuing to improve myself. It involves me having complete freedom in terms of my life, in respect of what I want to do and living life on my own terms. And it also involves competition. So the vision I have for my life is very much in alignment and fully reflects all of my values. And an example of making sure that your vision doesn't go against any of your values would be, for example, let's say you have a vision to travel the world every week. This may be an extreme example, but just imagine for a second that you've got this vision for your life that you want to travel all over the world, which would involve taking a flight on average once every week. If your top value, in other words, the thing that's most important to you in your life, is the environment, that could cause conflict. It might not. You might still be okay with that. But the point is, it's something to think about if that was you. If you were somebody that had your top value as the environment, and yet your vision for your life involved you traveling on a plane every single week, that could be out of alignment. That could be an example of a vision that is going against one of your values. And so you might want to rethink it. Or at the very least, you'll want to think about that thoroughly and actually decide yourself, am I going to be happy and fulfilled, truly happy and fulfilled with that vision I have for my life? Or would I actually feel a bit conflicted? Would it cause a bit of frustration? Would it cause a drop in my happiness? Would I be happy, but would I actually be happier not doing that? These are things that you need to think about. So it's not about whether it's right or wrong, it's just about making sure, and only you know yourself like you do, it's making sure that no part of your vision will go against any of your values. So we've just talked about using your values in terms of making sure that each one of your goals aligns with at least one of your values. and how your complete set of yearly goals should satisfy all of your top values. And what I'd like to do now is give you an example using my own goals from 2019 as to how this works in practice. So I'm going to list some of my goals now. Bear in mind these are just some of my goals from 2019. It's not all of them. So first of all, one of my goals was to have £14,000 saved up. And that was contributing to one of my values, which was freedom to live life on my terms. Because in my mind, at least, there's a certain amount of money that I want to save up and get to enable me to strike out on my own and pursue my entrepreneurial ambitions by starting my own business. And so that money that I'm saving up is contributing to that value that's important to me, which is freedom to live life on my own terms. Another one of my goals was to travel to Rome, Monte Carlo, Stoke Park and Cornwall. And that was feeding the value of travel and adventure. Next we have add one piece of clothing to my wardrobe each month to improve my style. So I identified in 2019 that one part of my life that I wanted to improve was the clothes that I wore. But the real point here is that was contributing to my value of self-improvement. Another goal was to achieve better results across all 6 key performance indicators than any other regional support manager in my job. And that was back in 2019, obviously when I was a regional support manager. Now I've been promoted slightly to area manager. But the point again is that this was feeding my value of competition. This got my competitive juices flowing, and it made sure that that value, competition, which is very important to me, was being fed and watered throughout the year. Another goal, if you can call it that, was to meet up with Jonathan once a week for at least 42 weeks of the year. Now, Jonathan is my best friend, and that was obviously contributing to my value of family and close friends. And finally, exercise at least 5 times per week for a minimum of 20 minutes for every week of the year. And perhaps, obviously, that was contributing to my value of health and well-being. Now, as I said, this is not all my goals from 2019, this is just a selection of them. But as you can see, notice how all 6 of my top values are taken care of. They're covered. As long as I tried to achieve these goals, it would mean I'm living my life in a way that's very much in alignment with my values. And by living my life in a way that's in alignment with the things that I've already identified are most important to me, it was increasing my chances of being happy. I will just take this opportunity to say that it's okay to have goals that may not specifically relate to one of your top values, but you must make sure that the goals do not contradict or conflict with any of your top values. So what I'm saying there is that it's fine to have goals that are nothing to do with your top values, and you may well find that happens. There might be things that you want to do and achieve each week and month and each year that don't really have anything to do with one of your values, and that's okay. But what's not okay is if one of your goals actually contradicts or conflicts with one of your top values, because that's what's going to cause a decrease in your happiness and fulfillment. To give you an example, if I set a goal to save £5,000 and the method of doing that in my own head was to have no holidays for the whole year and do nothing on weekends that costs any money, that would violate my value of travel and adventure. It would contradict and conflict against it. Now, the final little tip I'm going to offer you in terms of using your values is to say that your core values also come in useful when making decisions. Because your values can and should be used as the basis by which you make many of the decisions you make in your life. It's a really good way to use your values, actually, because you can use your values as a compass, as a guide to guide you into making the right decisions for you. More specifically, the decisions that are going to make you feel the most happy and fulfilled. And just to give you a random example, let's say somebody is offered 2 speaking gigs, but they're on the same day, and so they can only do one of them. Now let's say, for argument's sake, the first talk is to a group of wealthy business owners that will pay you £5,000 for the gig. The second talk is a charity that's asking for a speech for free to a school. Now, if somebody's top value is money, they're probably going to choose the £5,000 speech to do, obviously. But if somebody valued legacy and impact, and doing things like helping underprivileged young people was far more important to them than money, that could cause them to actually choose to do the free speech to their school and turn down the £5,000 speaking gig, and feel better and happier about doing so. Now again, there's no right or wrong there, morally. It's about what's right for you. And this is an example as well of how your values may well change over the course of your life. For example, it might be when you're fairly young and you don't have much money, you may well value helping other people. It might be a very strong value to you, but because you just need the money, you might still do the £5,000 talk. Whereas when you're older and let's say you've made a lot of money and suddenly £5,000 isn't even that much money to you, that's when you might actually decide, well, do you know what? Money is still important to me, but it's no longer anywhere near as important to me as legacy and impact and helping people. And so I'm going to decide to do the speech for free to that school, to the group of underprivileged school children, because that's what's going to make me feel happiest. So your values really can be a good way of helping you make decisions, not only that are going to be good for your future, but good for your happiness and fulfillment. And it's also likely to lead to less regret in your life from doing things or not doing things that were not in alignment with your values, and therefore not in alignment with who you really are. So hopefully you can all now see that when you know your values, you can use them in so many different ways. I've only just covered a handful of them here. There's so many ways you can then use that knowledge to increase the happiness and fulfillment you experience in your life. Lecture 6. Questions and thought exercises to get to know yourself more deeply. So here what I'd like to do is to share with you some of the best questions and thought exercises that I know to get you thinking deeply about who you really are. And some of these questions and thought exercises have really helped me over the years gain a high level of self-awareness, and you might not find every single one to be helpful, but be under no illusion, these are powerful questions and thought exercises in self-awareness, and so please do take the time to think thoughtfully and deeply about each one. Firstly, however, it's important to prepare for these questions and thought exercises, because as we all know, failing to prepare basically means you are preparing to fail, and preparation today leads to success tomorrow. And whilst we're on the subject of quotes about preparation and planning, the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. I love that quote. The more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. But anyway, let's not get too bogged down in quotes. The point is, I want you to put some time aside in your week or even your month to answer these questions properly. And you can start by even writing down exactly when and where you will do this exercise. It could be that you block out both mornings of a weekend to do it, or a couple of hours next week. It doesn't really matter as long as you do block out some time to do it and allow yourself plenty of time to think and reflect on these questions. I'd also encourage you to do this in an environment that you personally find relaxing or inspiring, or ideally both. And that might be different for everyone, but for example, you could do it in a nice coffee shop, you could do it in the lobby of a luxury hotel, you could do it whilst you're sitting on the beach, you could do it when you're out in nature or on a nice day overlooking some beautiful scenery, or maybe just in your living room. It doesn't really matter where, but it does need to be somewhere that you find relaxing or inspiring or both. Because you yourself need to feel relaxed, happy, positive, and in a good mood when you do this exercise. To help you do this exercise, I have included a document where I've listed all the questions and thought exercises that I'm about to go through anyway, so you can take that away with you and actually do them in your own time. But without further ado, let's get cracking with the questions now, starting with this one. Think about what you'd want to do with your life if you had £50 million in the bank. And that's after you've bought everything you've ever wanted to buy and after you've travelled everywhere you wanted to travel. And the reason I've pitched that question like I have is because so often when I've asked people in the past, what would you do if you had £50 million? They immediately come out with, I'd travel all over the world and buy this and buy that. And that doesn't really explore your true meaning and purpose in life. And that's the idea of this question, to really dig deep into what really drives you, what you genuinely love, what you'd want to do with the rest of your life, and what your true meaning and purpose in your life is. And by the way, the answer for some people might still involve travel, and that's fine, but what that will say to you, if that's the case, is that travel is clearly incredibly important to you and actually a significant part of your potential meaning and purpose in life. Or at the very least, that travel is a major part of who you are and what makes you tick and what makes you feel most alive. Next question. You are diagnosed with something that gives you 6 months to live, but they will at least be mostly active months where you will feel fit and healthy. How would this change you and what would you do? Next question. Think about this. Success doesn't change you, it just magnifies who you really are. So what will you be like when you are successful? It's a good question to think about because it's so true. As Will Smith said here, money and success don't change people, they merely amplify what is already there. Because so often we see people get a lot of money or become successful and it feels and sometimes looks to us like they've changed. And don't get me wrong, sometimes maybe they actually have genuinely changed, but I can guarantee you, and I can tell you with certainty, that in the vast majority of cases, we're talking at least 9 out of 10 of cases where people look like they've changed when they've got money and success. They actually haven't changed, they've just been able to become who they really are. Who they actually are gets amplified when they get money and become successful. Next question. What activities and interests did you have as a child that have been lost in adulthood? And that's a great question, because so often when we're children, we have hobbies and interests and we do things that often get lost when we become adults. And yet a lot of those things, although they might be specific to when we were children, at the very least offer hints at the kind of things we like and enjoy even now. And sometimes when people do this exercise, they discover lost passions and lost hobbies, things that they actually enjoyed as children that they could still enjoy to some extent even as an adult. Next question. What do you feel is lacking or missing in your life, if anything? Next question. What makes you happy? And you can think of that in terms of micro happiness and in terms of macro happiness. In other words, think about what makes you happy in the moment, and also think about it in terms of what makes you happy on that grander scale in terms of your life as a whole. What sort of things make you love yourself and love your life? What gives your life meaning and purpose and fulfillment and gives you that feeling of loving your life? And here's a thought exercise for you. Think about what you are good at, which will probably be a combination of talents and or passions. And sometimes asking other people what you're good at is useful with this. Because so often we're blind to what our talents are, we're blind to what we're good at. Because so often when we're good at something, we find it easy. And because we find it easy, we just think it's no big deal. We think everyone's like that. And so when you ask other people, you might be surprised at what they come up with. They might tell you things that you're good at that you just didn't think were a big deal. And so it helps you to identify what your true strengths are. And of course, sometimes things that you're good at will also be things that you're passionate about. Because although sometimes you might be good at something just because you've got natural talent, there might be other things that you're good at because you've worked hard at them, because you're passionate about them. Next question. When things are going well, what is it in the moment that is causing that? Next question. What comes easy to you that others find hard? Or to put it another way, what is fun and enjoyable to you that to others feels like hard work and a grind? And again, this question helps to identify your natural talents and natural gifts and what you're naturally good at and where your strengths are. Next question. How do you want to be known and remembered after you've gone? As part of answering that question, you could even write your own eulogy. Next question. When do you feel most alive and what causes that? What are you doing when you feel most alive? And on a similar vein, when do you experience flow, also known as being in the zone? Is it a particular activity or routine that puts you in the zone? And finally, to finish off with a bit of a thought exercise, if there were no people in the world but everything else was exactly as it is, what would you do? And this is a bit of a weird one where you just have to imagine this hypothetical impossible world, but just imagine this hypothetical impossible world where everything is exactly the same as you know it. Shops, your job, cars, everything's the same, except there's no people. Now obviously that would be impossible because you need people to serve you at shops and you need people to do this, that and the other, but just imagine that everything in the world was exactly as it was, houses and everything, but there were just no people. What would you do? Would you still drive the same car? Would you still live where you're living? Would you still buy what you buy? Would you still do what you do? And this is a good thought exercise for thinking about how you'd live your life without the opinions and judgments of other people. Without the influence of your parents, your friends, your colleagues, or society in general, how would you live your life? Lecture 7. The Big 5 Personality Traits. Many contemporary personality psychologists believe that there are 5 basic dimensions of personality, which are often referred to as the Big 5 personality traits. And the Big 5 personality traits are, in no particular order, openness to experience, the opposite of which is quite simply closed to experiences; conscientiousness, the opposite of which is simply a lack of conscientiousness; extroversion, the opposite of which is introversion; agreeableness, the opposite of which is disagreeableness; and neuroticism, the opposite of which is emotional stability. And it's been found that the Big 5 personality traits are very universal amongst all of us. One study that looked at people from about 50 different cultures found that the 5 dimensions of personality could be accurately used to describe personality for anyone. And many psychologists now believe that the 5 personality traits are not only universal, but that they also have biological origins. For example, psychologist David Buss has proposed an evolutionary explanation for these 5 personality traits, suggesting that these personality traits represent the most important qualities that shape our social landscape. And that's why they're so important and why I wanted to cover them in this course, because it's clearly a huge part of self-awareness. So the question now is, where do you rank on each? Well, let's delve a little deeper to find out. Openness describes a person's tendency to think in abstract, complex ways, and people who are very open to experiences tend to be very creative, adventurous, and intellectual types. They enjoy playing with ideas and discovering new experiences and that kind of thing. But what we're going to do anyway for each of the 5 personality traits is to go through the characteristics of somebody that would be high in that personality trait and the characteristics of somebody that would be low in that personality trait. And that will hopefully give you an idea as to where you stand. So whilst we're going through these personality traits, you can start thinking about roughly where you do stand. For example, are you high on that personality trait? Are you low on that personality trait? Or are you somewhere in the middle? So starting with openness to experience, people who are high in this personality trait tend to be highly creative and imaginative, open to trying new things, up for experiencing new challenges, comfortable thinking about abstract concepts, adventurous, and have a wide range of interests. On the contrary, people who are low in openness to experience tend to be unimaginative, don't like trying new things, dislike change, are resistant to new concepts and ideas, do not like abstract concepts or theories, don't like new experiences, and have limited interests. So have a think. Where do you stand? Next up we have conscientiousness. Now this describes a person's ability to be self-disciplined and work hard and have self-control in order to pursue their goals. And people that score high in conscientiousness tend to have the following characteristics. They like to be prepared and organised. They prioritise and ensure things are done by the deadline. They have excellent attention to detail. They like to have plans and schedules for everything. And they work hard towards their goals, resisting immediate gratification to focus on things that will get them longer-term results. Whereas those that score low on conscientiousness tend to prefer to wing it or roll with it. They do not prioritise and procrastinate on important things. They have little attention to detail and fail to complete necessary or assigned tasks. They dislike structure and schedules. And they fail to return things or put them back where they belong. Moving on now to extroversion, and we're going to go into more detail on extroversion in a later lecture because I think it's so important. But for now, I'm just going to do what I've been doing before, which is to go through the characteristics of somebody who is high in extroversion, and of course, the characteristics of somebody who is low in extroversion. So starting with high, if somebody is high in extroversion, they tend to enjoy being the centre of attention. They are keen to converse and be sociable. They enjoy meeting new people. They have a network of friends and associates. They make friends with others easily. And they gain energy from being around other people. And they often speak without thinking. People that are low in extroversion, in other words, introverts, dislike being the centre of attention, find it harder to start conversations and dislike small talk. They prefer being on their own in solitude. They have a smaller circle of close friends. They feel exhausted when having to socialise a lot and so gain energy from being on their own. And they carefully think things through before speaking. Next up we have agreeableness. And agreeableness describes a person's tendency to put other people's needs ahead of their own, and they tend to cooperate with other people rather than competing with other people. So people who are high in agreeableness experience a lot of empathy for other people, they get pleasure out of helping, serving and taking care of others, and they're usually quite trusting and forgiving individuals. So people that are high in agreeableness tend tend to have a great deal of interest in other people. They care about others. They feel empathy and concern for other people. They enjoy helping and contributing to the happiness of other people. And they assist others who are in need of help. Whereas those who are low in agreeableness tend to have little interest in others. They don't care about how other people feel. They have little interest in other people's problems. They insult and belittle others. And they manipulate others to get what they want. And finally, we have neuroticism. Neuroticism describes a person's tendency to experience negative emotions, including things like fear, sadness, anxiety, guilt, shame. And of course, we all experience negative emotions from time to time. That's perfectly normal and natural. But the fact is, some people are more prone to them than others. And so somebody that's high in the personality trait neuroticism will be somebody that tends to experience a lot of stress. They'd worry about many different things. They'd get upset easily. They'd experience dramatic shifts in mood. They'd feel anxious. And they'd struggle to bounce back after stressful events. Someone that's low in the personality trait neuroticism would tend to be described as emotionally stable. They'd deal well with stress. They'd rarely feel sad or depressed. They don't worry much. And they're very relaxed. We're going to finish up lecture 6 now by doing an exercise, and that's going to involve you going online and actually doing a test that's going to assess you for the big 5 personality traits. There's actually many great tests out there online that you can take to get a good feel for where you stand against each of the traits. But I would caution that these should only be used as a guide. In other words, you should still take the time to assess yourself and reflect on where you think you stand against each of the big 5. A couple of recommended websites and links for you are at openpsychometrics.org and 123test.com. And those are the exact links I've put up on the screen there. But to be honest, if you just Google Big 5 personality test, it'll probably come up with all sorts of different ones you can take. So just choose 1 or 2 and then just see what the results come out with. But as I said, just use them as a guide. You can still assess yourself. You can look at your results and decide whether you agree with them. If not, why not? And of course, if they support what you already think, then that's good as well. On the right is actually the results from one test that I took, and I have to say it was, generally speaking, accurate. I wouldn't necessarily agree with it to perfection, but it was more or less accurate. As you can see, O is for openness, C is for conscientiousness, E is for extroversion, A is agreeableness, and N is neuroticism. And I scored 54% for openness, which is probably about right. I'd argue myself it should be a little bit higher, but it came out reasonably high in openness. Conscientiousness scored highly, which I definitely agree with. I'm a very conscientious person. Extroversion I scored relatively low in, which again I'd agree on because I am quite an introverted person. Agreeableness came in at 48%, which again I'd probably say is about right. And neuroticism came in at 8%, which was very low for neuroticism. And again, I'd probably by and large agree with that because I am a very emotionally stable kind of person. So do your own test, see what it comes out with, and I'll see you in the next lecture.